One of the things I wanted to ask, I heard, I think, maybe it was Irongo who talked about this, 128 courts are connected to the internet. I wonder how many more are not connected to the internet. I think one of the speakers here talked about, I think it was the LSK president. So for the DPP, I was wondering what are some of the technology challenges that you still face in prosecution, in just getting your work done, which are maybe quick wins, and in a room of smart people that maybe they can begin to fix really quickly?
One, capacity. Whether it's human resource or budgeting, that is a real challenge for us, especially in government. But also culture, as the LSK president said, within the legal fraternity, for a long time, documents for disclosures, for example, you're expected to bring the original documents in hard copy, and everybody's used to that. If you remember with the dam case, one of the senior counsels stood up and said, "How do you expect me to go through over 10,000 documents in soft? I need them in hard copies, and can you highlight them for me?" So the culture is also one thing that we are trying to change, and we're trying to build up on capacity to be able to use technology, but also to increase budgeting so that we can have a seamless process within the whole criminal justice system. It is not sufficient for the ODPP, for example, only to be digital savvy, and then you don't have a judiciary that has good technology, or the investigators. There will still be something amiss. So when we are trying to look at it as something that needs to be seamless within the criminal justice system.
Dr. Ndemo, Professor Ndemo, I should say now, what are some of the ways you see these two fields of law and technology intersecting based on your work, on your life's work, I guess, especially around technology, and now you're on the other side teaching these things and constantly challenging us with your writing and your work speaking on these issues?
I'll begin with digitization. The concept of digitization is one even economists are discussing now, that you can't reverse it. It's going to go forward. And the more we digitize, the more we move more closer to leveraging technology to assist us. There's a lot of conveniences that come with digitization. We have seen it. It used to take us very long to get the passport. Now you can get the passport in a few days. At some point, we had tried to develop a case law management system for the government of Kenya. And the initial research we did is that when you go to the police station, or when the police record the first statements, they are actually tampered with when the person leaves and talks to the lawyers. So they want to go back to the police and change it to fit what they want it to be. If we digitize such that when you give the first recording to the police, it goes on to the cloud, it would assist the DPP to get the correct situation from the ground. And then we followed up and found that several places get false information. And even in the courts where we really wanted to change, we worked with a couple of judges. This is true, I'm not attacking the courts. We wanted to, like most parts of the world now, they have cameras in the courtroom and the processes go through, then that is transcribed for the judge. But here we still see the judge writing, even though in one of the instances, the judge was struggling to be awake. So I don't know whether he captured the evidence. We never followed that. So we actually need IT to assist if you are talking about justice, so that the evidence is collected properly. As I said, digitization is not going to stop. It's going to go forward, and it's going to be more complicated because we are in what we call the fourth industrial revolution. You know, every revolution has come with its own conveniences. We went through the third industrial revolution using ICTs. You have seen what it has done. The fourth industrial revolution, which is going to be characterized by mostly artificial intelligence, blockchain, 5Gs, virtual reality, all this, there are a set of technologies that would run it. In another 5 years, we would be very deep into those technologies. Already we are there, that if the lawyers don't understand, we would have serious problems in court, because as DPP said about cryptocurrency, in the next 2 to 5 years, every country would have their own crypto, what we call the stable currency. The reason why we are moving to that space is because of tracking and traceability. Where did the money come from, and where has it gone through? And with that, we can now know the source of the money. Right now, we actually don't know. As we talk about Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies, it's actually much easier to track and trace that one than cash money, which you can get from someone and there is no tracking and traceability. We need to move into that space. We need to understand that space, because that is where the entire world is gone. We have the largest population in the millennial who embrace this and will leave us behind and move on with it. We can't say, oh, we don't want to go into this space because we are analog. We have no choice.
It's interesting you mentioned that point, because Zirongo, you were talking about the challenges of an analog democracy in a world that's moving much faster than it seems the court system or basically the legal setup is keeping up with, right? You want to just build on that a little?
Thank you very much. So on the Slido app that is being promoted, I think still on the screen beside me, there was a wonderful question that somebody raised, and I really love the embracing of this technology for participatory conferencing. And the question was, do screenshots of private messages without consent constitute an invasion of somebody's privacy? Right? And that's the question. 3 weeks ago, is it a month ago, we had an expose around the Nairobi Women's Hospital. And those WhatsApp messages clearly demonstrated, at least to the reader, the potential or the possibility of hospital administrators deliberately increasing and inflating the costs of medical care, and also having a deliberate policy of admitting patients when they didn't require to be admitted. Right? Now, the question, I guess, in that context is an interesting one. Is that admissible evidence in a court of law? Could we sue the chief executive of the Nairobi Women's Hospital for essentially defrauding not just private households and families, but also the National Health Fund and several private insurance companies at the same time, right? The other one is an interesting one. Which is, we work, as you know, Amnesty works really around police reforms and building a culture of respect for the rule of law among our 150,000 police officers or so. And we tend to speak out most with regards to about 50 to 100 officers. And I sometimes feel that perhaps we are disproportionately obsessed by these so-called rogue officers. But in a sense, they they are a threat to public safety in many ways. We've been proposing that actually would be interesting to start putting body cameras on police officers so that we can actually use that evidence to either protect officers from unfair criticisms that they're using excessive force, or convict them on the basis of that. Is that now within our grasp? Can we have CCTV cameras in all the police stations, particularly around the admissions area, to make sure that the 39 people who died in police custody last year, that number is reduced in 2020. So I think for us in the human rights field, we're looking at it in this regard, to a sense of how do you hold, and I guess how do you protect state officers from accusations that they are misusing their office. So I think for us, digital capacity is important. Can I just raise one other one? Many of us probably remember the Consolata kid, if I can use that phrase. This was sometime last year, a young man who was sitting on, sorry, not young man, he was, I think, 14 years of age. He was a boy who was a student at Consolata Primary School, or secondary school. And he was sitting on a rooftop somewhere in the Kileleshwa, Kilimani area, essentially mouthing off at a fellow student. And one of the things that struck me was how righteous the middle class became around either declaring that the mother should be, that he should be expelled, the mother should be arrested for negligence, the Nigerian boyfriend should be deported. I mean, we had a whole range of strategies to deal with this case. But I guess the other thing that strikes me a little bit is that child is going to grow up. And that all that information is still up on the internet. And even if we don't, and I don't mention the child's name now, we have the child of the other child that he vilified in the media. And how do we protect children's information 10 to 15, 20 years from now?
The LSK president talked about, for Linda and Samuel, about how even lawyers are resistant to technology. And that's some of the challenges, the tech issues notwithstanding. Those who are supposed to represent us are also afraid of going digital. You're changing that in some ways.
Yeah, I think we're changing that. We realized when we opened up our space last year in January, we wanted to focus on capacity building for lawyers. And so we invited them every single week, every Friday evening. We'd run events to teach them on privacy issues, technology issues, engage on hackathons. And I remember the first hackathon, I went to one of the partners to just pitch and ask them, could you support our hackathon? And so she called us into the boardroom and said, look at this girl, she wants to hack us. Guys. And I was like, okay, no, it's a hackathon. And so they declined to support us on the basis that we were going to hack them. And so this year they called us and said, I'm not going to mention names, is there a way we can work together? So I think people resist what they don't know. And it takes time. It takes the early adopters to first get on board, and then you have those who come in way late in the day. And I remember when I think Uber first came into Kenya in 2013 or so, I asked my parents if they could support me to begin an Uber business. And they told me, who can get an Uber? Like who will leave their car and take a stranger? And then we had Airbnb, and I was crazy just beginning things. I asked them, can I set up an Airbnb? Can you give me some money? They told me, who would go into a stranger's house and not a hotel? And so every single day we ask those questions, even as lawyers. Why would we go before a robot? How can we join via video link? But the current crisis, as the LSK president mentioned, just teach us every day that can we use video conferencing now to show up in court rather than have people spend so much money and then show up in court and the judge is not available, maybe they're sick, and all these other logistical issues that come in place. So are lawyers resistant? I think lawyers are a representation of our society. We don't take technology until we really need it. So today, for instance, we didn't have the program printed. And so we had this class of people, I'll not mention who walked in and like, where are the programs, Linda? You need to print. We're like, no, it's on the Hoover app. If you get on the app. And then they took some time to, and then they said, okay, let me download. And then they have to delete some pictures and go on their WhatsApp and clear it and then download the app, because they just have to download the app to see it. So unless we get to that point where people have, if the government says you can't register a company unless you go on eCitizen, or if it's in Rwanda, you have to be on Irembo. That's when you can get these government services. That's what makes people go in the masses. But also that brings the issue of access and equality. There are people who can't afford it. If we are changing our education system to go online, for example, or our judiciary now, you're putting in cases online, we must ensure that lawyers who are in Wajir, whatever place, if it's a far-flung area, do they have access to the internet? Can they actually go in and lodge their cases online? So I think it's a balance, but we are a representation of society, I think.
Samuel, the view from the trenches.
Well, I think for us, as I said earlier, I think Linda has mentioned the challenges that we face, and I must confess I'm one of those who are looking for hard paper. I think I'm properly guided. Next time I will look at my phone for this documentation. But from an accountability perspective, I think there are perhaps three things that can be said. One is that the legal sector has to move with the times, and it has to extend its pace. The frustration that you get, and I see the DPP and law enforcement get into this all the time, when some of the things that Prof. and Irungu have described create the gap between what, for example, the evidence that is admissible in court and justice. And citizens see this gap growing by the day, and they begin to lose confidence in the institutions of government. So the legal system has to move in tandem with the times and not be stuck in the past. The legal, the justice system is usually very conservative, but that conservatism has to be tempered by the very fast pace with which young people or techies or technology is inventing solutions for every aspect of our lives. We need to look at this as the future, the present and the future, and not in the far future, but in the near future, when, you know, the way we do things will be disrupted.
Right.
And from the basic things of revenue collection, revenue management, performance management, and a lot of other things that seem so mundane can actually be enhanced significantly by the use of technology. And I'm sure Prof will tell you that some of the pilots they were doing around revenue collection and how that transforms when you take away the human interface from the collection of revenue. That becomes something to be worth thinking about. But the other aspect of also is how do you then use technology to make sure that the people you serve are not disconnected from you? I've seen more recently, and the DPP is here, and others have followed in the justice sector, to communicate to the public what they are doing very proactively, which is something that is expected under our constitution, but also under the access to information law. But institutions have to deliberately move into that direction. How do you make sure you are not disconnected? The crisis of confidence that a lot of our institutions suffer is primarily because there's no engagement. My mother in the village, if she doesn't go to court, she has no way of knowing how our courts operate, and that distance creates a chasm that is unhealthy for our institutions.
All right. I want to go on a slight tangent, Mr. Haji, if you will entertain this. I no longer work in the Kenyan media, so pia mimi ni mpenzi mtazamaji. But I read all the time about conflict between the DPP and the DCI and who's having beef with who, as we say on social. So can you set the record straight about what seems to be the challenges within that relationship? Because we, as your customers, expect that those who investigate and those who prosecute read from the same page. All the reporting seems to suggest otherwise. So what is the true story?
I think the challenge is the media wanting to, blow things out of proportion. The constitution is very clear. The law is very clear. Sometimes, things on the ground you can have challenges on the ground, but that doesn't mean.
This is interesting you say that, because in Kenya we say ground between different.
I'm saying on the ground, you can have challenges, but that in no way translates to challenges within the offices itself. It's normal. We can always have teething problems, and sometimes you can have officers who don't understand the law itself. So, those are just normal challenges. It doesn't in any way mean that the ODPP and the DCI is at loggerhead. We are not, and we are working. Cases are going on, and that's what will happen.
So why do you think that these many sustained stories about this perpetual conflict that's what Kenyans
Of course,
believe?
because there are certain individuals who want it that way, who are not comfortable with how we are prosecuting graft and corruption cases, and as I said, who have wishful thinking. And wish to have all this told. That's my take, if you ask me.
All right, great. Let me go back to some of these questions on Slido now. I would like to know whether all the judiciary stakeholders are jointly building an electronic system management which can be used by all the stakeholders. So you have the mic, so you want to start with that as well?
Yes, we are working through the NCAJ, and even tomorrow we have a meeting with the Chief Justice under the NCAJ umbrella, and we are working towards having a system that can interrogate and work seamlessly. Yeah, we're doing that.
All right, Professor Ndemo, somebody asked here, how do we ensure that even as the judiciary puts up cases online, we protect information of the vulnerable groups, for example, children's matters? I guess it's
like
handling information.
Like what Irongo said.
Yes.
The space that we are in now, it becomes very difficult to delete some of the data. And the fear is that we need to be very, very careful as in terms of our cultural and other things, because I know for sure in another few years, even marriage, you would refer on to Google and see what the father was like before you decide whether you are marrying from that home. Even employers, we are now beginning to teach about employment, how it has changed. Actually, they look on social media to see if you abuse people online, you would abuse people in your workplace. Then they get rid of you. So there are some benefits to that, but when you talk about vulnerable groups like children, I think we need to engage these platforms that they need to delete, or they should be using such data when you become an adult. It's actually important for you to analyze data about me and make decisions about me, but not those people who cannot make their own decisions. I don't know whether they can agree to delete because that is put there by. So the courts must begin also to anonymize the names when they do that. If you see cases like in the US, they anonymize groups that are very vulnerable. I think we need to bring that to our place here.
Let me just add on that. As we adopt technology, of course, we'll also have to come with legislation that will govern how we use the information. And we might have to break it into sectors and different thematic groups or interest groups. So, of course, as we digitize and as we're sitting down under the NCAJ, it's much broader than just saying we're going to have a case management system or a system that straddles through the criminal justice system. We will have to come with regulations and legislations that will govern information and data protection that emanates from this. So it's going to be much broader than what people actually think, and it will take a bit of time, and we'll have to get best practices from different jurisdictions and adapt that, and ensure that we protect vulnerable groups like children and others. Yeah.
All right.
Larry, just for the avoidance of doubt, the law today protects the identity of minors in the court system, so that even up to today, you'll find that they use initials to do that. So I think the bigger question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do you protect children who are more and more present in the digital space when they are below the age of consent and are not considered to be able to engage responsibly out there?
All right. Wangari asks, and Linda, this is a good one for you to take, an area to focus on: where did the law leave the women in tech dialogue? They are heavy users. As such, it would be critical that they are authoritatively engaged.
Okay, that's a hard one. So I'll start from the other one and say that I read online about these children whose mothers are influencers. And so I think you know them. They film every aspect of their lives. And so they're like, hi guys, welcome to my channel, every day, and this is my baby. So these kids decided that they're gonna print t-shirts written, you don't have my consent to film me. So when their moms start their video, they show you the video. They put on their T-shirts. Because they don't want to be online, but their parents want to put them on Instagram. So I think it's a genuine concern that we need to remove these digital natives and get their consent. If they can't consent, then even you should not post pictures of your child online because somebody would use them, not for good. About women engaging in technology, I think it's a global issue, and we have different groups like tech women that are trying to constantly get women into STEM. And there are scholarships for it, and I think that covering that gap would take resources. In Kenya, and maybe in Africa, I think we have more women engaging on technology rather than the men. For the women lawyers in Kenya, we notice that there are more female lawyers engaging in technology than men. The ICT Committee of the Law Society, for instance, has, I think, 2/3 of the men, of women who are in the committee who are working on ICT, and they're in different sectors in the economy. So how do we change it? I think we have to be deliberate, for example. For instance, I wasn't supposed to be on this panel, and then we realized, oh my God, we can't have a panel. So we have to be deliberate about, are you creating a space for women? On International Women's Day on Sunday, we had a concert together with ICJ and Amnesty International, and we said, can we create online spaces where women are safe? Can we stop cyberbullying so that women speak their mind online? And if somebody bullies them, or people are posting revenge porn just because to shut down a female politician or a career professional so that they would shut down, we are very interested in, can we help in that particular sector? Those are my comments.
Yes, you wanted to say, because I've been criticized for asking the question about gender to the only woman on the panel, and that's only because I started there and I was going to go to the men as well because they have an equally important voice on this. But I'll take that criticism. Well deserved.
So I only grabbed the mic just to protect you.
Thank you.
So I guess a couple of things. One is, I haven't spent a lot of time on the census, but I really encourage us to look at the census with an eye to some of these things. When I did this weekend, I looked particularly at the Nairobi County census data, and what struck me there was actually there is a disproportionate access to the internet and to smartphones that disfavors women than men. Right? So I had kind of come from a space that somehow it'll be roughly about the same, but actually it is a significant difference. I wonder what that would look like across rural counties as well. That's just Nairobi County. The second thing that would be interesting to kind of look at, so there are two stats that we shared during this campaign, Online Safety for Her, in the context of this conference. One was globally, every 30 seconds, a woman who is on Twitter receives a toxic tweet, right? Now, I can hardly, I'd love to say, I haven't seen the methodology behind it, but it's a very scary statistic or a fact. The second one is that 70% of women who are engaging in social media are actually worried about sexual harassment in that space. Right? So the reality, I think, for us is that we have not created safe online streets and neighborhoods for women to engage as powerfully as some of the men who are engaging. Yeah? Now, I think this is a major challenge. I can see Bitange wanting to jump on the mic, so I'm going to hand over to him so that he can ensure that this almost manual at least can leave people present to the fact that there may be a few feminists, male feminists on this side. And in that note, I hand over to Bitange.
That makes two.
Actually, we like you just answered, there are more women in tech now than men. If you look at the space I talked about, Fourth Industrial Revolution, there are most women groups doing machine learning, AI, than men. But I also wanted to say the government is giving a course, it's called Digital Learning Program, even for basic users, serious users, even coders. This is free. They're doing it from constituency to urban areas. I know if lawyers said they wanted to, the Ministry of Communication, to do it, they could do it. The reason being is that people need to know how to engage in social media. I see some comment in social media that will compromise the lives of these young people in the days to come. And that's why I don't work in government, but I know they are running that program, DLB, Digital Learning Program, if you are able to look at it.
Right.
Maybe I can just add my voice. First of all, I think that table of prosecutors who come from ODP does not represent. I was surprised when so 3/4 of the ODPP workforce is actually female. It's women.
3/4.
3/4 of the ODPP. And the most efficient offices that I know of are actually, women. And the most progressive, even in terms of technology, are still women. So I think, in essence, it's also a myth to try and portray that women are not, part of this revolution and part of adapting the different changes. In fact, they lead in this, and that's why we have Linda here, not leading this tech.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and actually, let me just on the hackathon. When I was first told the hackathon, so I was thinking, is this a marathon for hackers, or I really did not know. And it's only later on, after interacting with Linda and others, when we had our own hackathon, then I understood what it was. And it was still the ladies and women in ODPP who were leading this, really, even introducing hackathon in the ODPP.
Is there a difference between your online ID and offline self? Is a question that somebody has asked here. Is there a difference between your online ID and your offline self? We've got legal minds on this stage, so.
From a legal perspective.
Legal and then tech. So you want to take legal first?
I'm probably the least proficient person to take legal on this panel.
And there's a lot of head scratching. Is there a difference between your online ID and your offline self?
I don't think there is. You know my Twitter account.
Yes.
It's not in my name, but it's me. There is a description there. It is who is the owner of that ID. Because some of the problems that we are going to see is people using fake names to do that. And the reason why I think we got into the digital identity, just like Indians' biometrics, is going to root out most of those people. That I think,
yes.
And that will make it much, much easier to know who generates what.
Maybe to add on that, the onus would be on the investigator and the prosecutor to prove that you're the online, that you as Mado, you're the one represented online. So the onus is on us to prove that, if it's from a criminal perspective. And once you do that, then you cannot be able to differentiate, even if you use
yes.
a pseudonym. Yeah.
The more the lawyers that they must understand how the internet works, they understand the IP address, and then they can trace the work into where it originated from. I think it is correct in saying that they could.
And that's why ODPP has really taken on tech, because increasingly we are having complex cases where, through digital footprints, we have to prove that really this is the person who did, or this money belonged to so and so, or the phone that we got warrants to actually belong to the person who's been charged there. So increasingly, and then when you come to even cryptocurrencies, as a prosecutor, you have to know what it is. You have to understand the analysis that has been done by the investigator or the criminal analyst, who's drawing a lot of chart and information. So packaging it and presenting it to court is something that increasingly we're having to do. But it's also important for the judiciary also to understand what we've packaged and what we present in court. So very soon, you will not be able to differentiate a lawyer from a techie, because we have to understand, and we must be able to present it to court.
How are you dealing with these new cases? You talk about the increasingly complex nature of it. If I steal Ndemo's digital wallet, which has its cryptocurrencies, what are you going to charge me with? It's just a series of numbers.
Where would you get my password?
If I ran into it somehow.
You hack into it?
If I hacked into it, for instance.
That's an offense.
That's an offense.
What is the offense? What is the offense?
I don't know it on top of my head, but it is there. It's an offense, and we'll be able to charge you. But of course, I must have the evidence. I must be able to link you to the hacking itself and to the digital footprint. So as I said, it's a tall order,
right?
And we need to have those skills. So, for example, in ODPP, we are now employing analysts. We're employing experts. It's not sufficient to just be a prosecutor. You must have the skills for us to be able now to present the evidence in court.
The problem is that the hackers may not be here. And that's where the challenge comes. There are countries where there are many hackers who hack and get this information. You could see what happened, for example, in the elections in the US, where people were programming other people in another part of the world. So I think we need to figure out how we can deal with these transnational crimes. Otherwise, if you called someone in some country to hack into me and share, it's going to be very difficult for ODPP, Office of the Prosecutors, to know.
Yes, you wanted to add something.
This will go on and on and on.
I think we'll keep. I'm enjoying this conversation.
But we also have, mutual legal assistance where we can apply to the various jurisdictions. If, for example, it's a dead end and you can see this is taking you to, I don't know where, maybe to China, then we'll have to apply MLA to China, to the law enforcement there, to now help us to trace who exactly in China did this. And then, it's a whole lot of investigations that will have to be done. But these are some of the challenges, as the professor is saying. It also depends on whether the jurisdiction is willing to be cooperative and to work with Kenya. Yeah.
So about 3 weeks ago, I was at the NTV studios, and I found myself on another manel. So I did something a little bit dramatic, which was to leave the stage or leave the studio, and it generated a bit of a debate. I now call that demaneling. It's actually part of the Cambridge Dictionary. So I was going to suggest, with all respect to the panel here, that I leave my chair, and Larry invites a woman to come up and take this point, ask a question or makes a comment. And then secondly, you allow the other men to also step down, and then we will end up the panel as a funnel.
I love that idea, because I had room for some final closing comments, and I'm going to ask the men to step down. Thank you all so much.